Well, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. You can also follow us on social media, such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Tonight, we are very thrilled to welcome Lisa Wells and Lydia Millet. Lisa Wells is a poet and nonfiction writer, originally from Portland, Oregon. Her debut collection of poetry, The Fix, won the Iowa Poetry Prize. Her poems and essays have been published by the New York Times, Harper's Magazine, Granta, The Believer, N+1, the Poetry Foundation, and many others. She lives in Seattle now and is an editor for The Volta and Letter Machines editions. Like many of us, Wells has spent years overwhelmed by news of apocalyptic-scale climate change and the coming sixth extinction. She did not need to be convinced of the stakes. Wells embarked on a pilgrimage seeking answers in dedicated communities, outcasts, and visionaries on the margins of society. Wells meets Finisia Medrano, an itinerant planter and misanthrope, leading a group of nomadic activists to rewild the American desert. She finds a group of environmentalist Christians practicing what they call watershed discipleship in New Mexico. Another group in Philadelphia turning the tools of violence into tools of farming, guns into plowshares. She watches the world's greatest tracker teach how to read a trail and visits botanists who are restoring land overrun by invasive species and destructive humans. She talks with survivors of catastrophic wildfires in California as they try to rebuild in new ways that acknowledge the fires will come again. Blending reportage, memoir, history, and philosophy, Wells opens up seemingly intractable questions about the damage we have done and how we might reckon with our inheritance. Wells' new book, Believers, Making a Life at the End of the World, demands transformation. If the earth is our home, if our home is being destroyed, how then shall we live? Joining Wells in conversation this evening is Lydia Millet. Millet has written more than a dozen books of literary fiction, most recently a novel called A Children's Bible, which was a finalist for the National Book Award in Fiction and one of the New York Times Book Review's best books of 2020. Other titles include the novel Sweet Lamb of Heaven and How the Dead Dream, which was our very first indispensable book club pick here at Powell's Books way back in 2007. Millet has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction and various other honors, and she works as an editor at the Center for Biological Diversity, an organization dedicated to fighting climate change and species extinction. She joins us tonight from Camden, Maine. Tonight's event includes an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you like, you can hit the thumbs up on that and upvote that particular question. Most importantly, please consider supporting Lisa and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her new book from us. A link to buy Believers, along with a link to Lydia's books, will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Lydia, Lisa, it's so great to welcome you both, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know, Lisa, were you going to read a little bit before we started? Were we going to start that way? I've forgotten what we said.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's get it out of the way. I thought since this is my hometown, I'd just start at the beginning, which I haven't done yet, and read a little tiny condensed piece of the introduction. This book began in a place called Sparta, a rugged swath of sparsely populated country near the Oregon-Idaho border. There, I spent several days in the temporary encampment of a group of nomadic gardeners, led by a woman named Finisia Medrano. For more than 30 years, Finisia had lived off the grid, trespassing her way through private and public lands, planting wildflowers with edible roots, and proclaiming her apocalyptic gospel to all who crossed her path. Those of us living in civilization were cast as whores of Babylon, or motherfuckers, because we rape Mother Earth with our industrial plows. Our Babylon would soon collapse, and Finisia was planting seeds for the world that would be born from its rubble. I'd long been familiar with certain elements of the story Finisia was telling, mainly the notion that our civilization, characterized by a dependence on agriculture, colonization, and the building of permanent settlements, is inherently hierarchical, unsustainable, and doomed to collapse. In the mid-90s, when I was a sophomore in high school, I read a couple of books that converted me to a version of this story, and in response became a sort of secular teenage evangelist. I dropped out of school along with 3 of my closest friends. Together, we enrolled in a wilderness survival program through which we hoped to acquire the skills necessary to form egalitarian villages on the post-apocalyptic frontier. Ideally, we'd spread the word and save the world. Barring that, we'd save ourselves. In 2014, when I visited Sparta, it appeared the promised apocalypse was no longer an abstract future event, but well underway. Biologists warned of a 6th mass extinction. Dozens of species were going extinct every day, some of whom we'd never seen and now would never know. A massive hole opened in the earth that summer in Siberia on a peninsula called Yamal, translated as the end of the world, a name that took on special significance when scientists theorized the chasm was produced not by a meteor or by extraterrestrials, as some internet sleuths believed, but by methane gas exploding out of thawing permafrost. Articles describe nightmare climate change scenarios in which massive amounts of carbon and methane previously trapped in the earth and ice would surface. These releases could set off a warming feedback loop, thawing greater swaths of the Arctic, releasing greater amounts of carbon dioxide and methane and so on, superheating the atmosphere until life on Earth as we knew it was extinguished. If we manage to phase out fossil fuels in the near future, this methane bomb scenario could be avoided, but as one researcher put it, there's a chance that some of these really big ecosystem feedbacks will take the fate of the climate out of our hands. Images of the Siberian chasm were disturbing and starkly beautiful. In some photos, it appeared as if an oculus were punched in space-time, revealing an inky abyss devoid of stars. It seemed to encapsulate the anxiety so many of us were feeling, a fathomless hole torn into all that was supposed to be solid and immutable. Whether or not the methane bomb threat was imminent or overblown was a matter of debate, but the threat of reaching a point of no return was categorical. That point of no return is not the primary subject of this book, but it is the backdrop, the central prophecy. Maybe that's enough.
That's great, yeah. Can you hear me right now? Because I just changed my little earbud things out.
I think you sound great.
Okay, good. So first of all, I do want to say that I love this book so much, and I'm a kind of jerk about books, and I often don't love them. And I really loved this and thought it was brilliant. And one of the things I loved most about it was, well, first, I like the fact that it doesn't make arguments about where we are. It doesn't struggle to set sort of, it doesn't struggle to set the terms of its own discussion, and just sort of assumes that we know where we are and that we're on the brink of this tremendous loss, and experiencing it, of course, already, always, but that really this cascade of losses that we face now, it is unprecedented, no matter how sanguine we are about the sort of, I don't know, chronic presence of apocalyptic discussions throughout history. We really now are, you know, in a situation. We're in a bit of a situation. So yeah, I love this. I think it's a great and important book. But I also was very, I was just very seduced by your stories of yourself as a teenager, because I was a really conformist teenager, and
that surprises me.
No, I kind of did what I was told to some degree, and your sort of teenage years seem so exciting to me in this book, sort of, and rebellious, but in a kind of, of course, there were the blind spots that all of us have, and teenagers have, and adults have, but also just this real engagement with the idea of the wild and the other, and that which was beyond, I don't know, just the man, And so I was hoping you could talk a little about that for readers, like sort of how you were this rebel, and whether you think of yourself still as one now. I know you have a child, and kids make us sometimes less rebellious, sometimes I guess, rarely more so. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know if you want to. I don't know if that's too personal or if that's okay, but
not at all.
I'm interested.
Thank you. I'll say, and I'll try not to just constantly blow, love at you. It's not sunshine, but I've thought about a children's Bible so much. I'd finished writing my book before I read it. And I felt like maybe I was projecting these resonances, but it was like a profound experience for me to read that book. In part because you are telling this new kind of story that I'm like asking for in my book. But also I just felt like if I had found Evie instead of Holden Caulfield, that would have been, and I liked him too. He was crabby, but in a way that felt resonant for me. But it was such a, she was like someone that I would have admired at that age. So yeah, the long and the short of it is that when I was, I think 16, right after I turned 16, I found a couple of books that sort of radicalized me. One of them was this book, Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And another one was really like a series of books by this naturalist guy named Tom Brown. And so me and my three best guy friends, all read these books and became obsessed with the stories that they told, which were basically, one was the Ishmael story was a retelling of human history, and one that I had never heard before, that involved, like the eradication of these multifarious and rich, diverse ways of living and interacting with the land by this kind of hungry maw of, he just phrased it as civilization. And then the other books also had sort of an apocalyptic tone, but they were more focused on going away to the wilderness and relearning these lost skills of survival. So making shelters and building fires and gathering water and hunting and those kinds of things. So we were very afraid that the collapse was about to happen. And also we thought it probably should. And we dropped out of high school and ran away to this wilderness survival program. And some of us stuck with the skills and got good at them. And then others of us didn't. Me. You froze, Lydia. I don't know. Am I frozen?
Sorry, I think I lost you for a minute there.
I think I lost you too.
So
not
wait,
frozen on their end, they say. So.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. So I just got to the part where I wasn't very good at any of the skills and, preferred to smoke cigarettes and read Allen Ginsberg. But also this, like, I had kind of a fanaticism, very unforgiving, and not necessarily misattuned to the situation, but nevertheless like untenable as a way of life.
Yeah. So now you're, kind of, I mean, I don't know, they call us like adults or whatever right now, because we're of a certain age. And do you feel like, how do you feel in relation to that? And this isn't in the book, I don't think exactly. So I'm trying to tease it out because I'm just personally in a prurient way curious about it. Yeah. Which I think are the only questions really worth asking in this kind of Zoom situation, are like basically prurient. Great. But so sort of like, how do you feel in relation to sort of that rebel moment that you had now? Like, do you feel like you've kind of, I sometimes feel like, there's that quote from, I guess it's Flaubert, that people are always saying to like excuse their their lazy apolitical behavior or whatever, their apathy, which is like about writers specifically. It's like something about like living a, you know, a bourgeois life so that you can be living, like Flaubert endorsing, like living a bourgeois sedentary or whatever, like a life of privilege so that you can be bold and outrageous or something
On
in
the
your
page.
work.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I always feel like that's extremely like affirming, right? Like, so I can just like lie on the couch. Yeah, exactly. I can like lie there watching like TV like an old pig kind of, and then feel like, oh, it's all in the service of my art or whatever. Right. So
I did a lot of that while writing this book. I had to take breaks and lie on the couch and feed. I mean, I don't think, I want to answer this honestly. And because I wouldn't say that I'm 100% living into the values that I kind of promote in the book, you know, which are not like values that were existing. They were values that I found in the process of writing the book. But, you know, I think the difference between myself now and myself as a teenager and then this long period in between, you know, as a kid, it was very easy to sort people into good and bad categories. And certainly, you know, there are certain corporations who I don't view as human, like people, and certain forces at work that I do view as, you know, bad, just bad. But I think part of the healing process from my fundamentalism has meant also trying to understand the contexts in which these kind of bad behaviors arise, and like, you know, one's apathy or addictions, or, you know, like everything that is pulling us away from the experience of being truly connected to what's happening. So right now, and through the writing of the book, the sort of radical aspect of it for me has been being willing to return again and again to what seems true or what I'm actually learning, rather than screening it out or intellectualizing it or making excuses for myself. Even if I can't always act in accordance with, you know, the central value, which is the preservation of and increase of biodiversity, can I still be honest with myself about my impact, and you know, can I hold both of those things in mind, basically? Because I think earlier on in life, the fundamentalism required that I disavow the ways in which I was guilty of the very things that I was accusing everyone else of, you know, and that's kind of a deforming experience for a person to, you know, jettison those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like maybe in the first essay, you have a quote that I liked that was like referring to the surplus of terror. I think surplus of terror and delusion. Yeah, in the ether. And I mean, I guess that is a thing. You know, we're just constantly, there's this sort of paralysis of knowledge, you know, that we have, or sort of like paralysis of awareness that we experience, in that we're just these tiny creatures in this vast like panoply, this huge landscape, and the landscape is overwhelming. And then you know, there are like climate scientists. I recently was like moderating a panel with Michael Mann, the climate scientist, who'd come out with a book about really about sort of denialists and obfuscators of climate science and stuff, and you know, disinformation campaigns and that kind of thing. And he seems to feel quite strongly that, you know, stressing the idea of personal sacrifice and individual responsibility and stuff like that, that plays into denialist kind of strategies, you know, corporate and fossil kind of strategies. Mm-hmm. And he's not comfortable talking about like cultural paradigm shifts and sort of instilling fear, or speaking in a way that it might instill fear, and really cleaves to hope as as the beacon in all this. But I find myself kind of conflicted about all that. And I actually do, I guess I'm just curious what you think about that, because I get this book specifically is not about structural change. It's about these stories of people and following them and stuff. And yet still I feel like we can't not refer to this, right? Like talking about so I sort of personally feel it's also, I understand what man is saying. Also, I feel it's deeply sort of disingenuous not to talk about personal sacrifice and paradigm shifts and sort of, I mean, forms of cultural revolution or something. Unfortunate associations of that phrase. But so I don't know. I'm just really curious to hear what you would say about that.
Well, I think it's a great question. I think one of the reasons why I didn't tackle those issues is because they just felt out like beyond my ken to some extent. Like it's hard for me to think in those terms. But I would say in terms of cultural revolutions, that is one of the ways that there's pressure is brought to bear on these big bad guys, who are creating 70% of the fossil fuel expenditure or whatever. I think also, one of the, you could view it as cynical. I find it interesting. I'm not going to say that I believe that it's absolutely true. I mean, in a way, coming to the end of the book, I have a lot more imagery and information and ideas of where to go. But I wouldn't say that I feel like I understand the problem better. If anything, it's like more complex and more confusing. So I'll just say that right out of the gate. But one of the things that some of the rewilder folks talk about is basically that this, kind of hive mind situation, right? Like this hive, maybe like a swarm of locusts is the metaphor that's sometimes used. Like this machine of civilization, it's just going to collapse, and it's very hard to stop what it's doing. But you can help soften the collapse. You can help bring about the collapse more, in a more humane way, or in a way that preserves some biodiversity. But that the point of shifting these stories and learning these skills, it's like you're bearing torches through the dark of history. That's sort of how my friend Peter describes it. It's like you do this one because it's fun, like beyond these kind of sacrifice narratives. Like it's fun to be with people and practice these skills. It can be fun to grow a garden. It can be fun to take a super fun site and remediate it using these invasive species. Like these are like truly creative acts. So I think one of the other arguments is like, it's not so great right now anyway. Like why focus on what people have to give up? Like digging the ditch of your own survival day in and day out on your own or in some nuclear family is not like exactly the most satisfying way to spend a life anyway. So yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit off track, but that was one of the reasons why I felt drawn. I mean, of course, I'm only going to write about what interests me, but that was one of the things that interests me, is that each of these different communities had their own way of improving their lives. I mean, that's how they really framed it, Yeah.
I mean, I guess, so for those people who are here tonight who haven't actually read your book yet, I think I need to give you a chance to just talk about some of the, because they're very charismatic figures in this book, and of which I believe one is you, but also your friends, Peter. You talked about Finisia already, but I guess I just wanted you to sort of touch on some of the, the greatest hits of people, like of characters, characters in the book, so that people can know what some of these stories are. And so they can buy this book. I mean, it's a pandering question, but I'm still going to ask it because I think it's important. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, so Finisia and her crew, and spoiler alert, Finisia died actually while I was finishing the book, so that ended up in the book. But she had lived off the grid for more than 30 years. I think it was closer to 40 in the end. You know, trying to replant some of these wild edible gardens in the Great Basin, but also living as an itinerant minister. So she was preaching this, you know, as I said, this kind of apocalyptic gospel, and was really a trickster figure. So, you know, and then there's me and my friends, the dropouts, and then my friend Peter, who went on to start a rewilding school in Portland. So I'll just give a shout out to him because he's around, and his programs there's free skill shares every week. So you can go meet him yourself. But he had this character called the Urban Scout, which was sort of a provocateur who was, you know, like practicing these survival skills on the street for everyone to see. He practiced preemptive post-apocalypticism. And then, you know, one big thread of the book, and I know some of these folks are in attendance tonight, so that's exciting, is about these radical Christians who, you know, I get that radical Christians mean something else in other contexts, but they practice what they call watershed discipleship. I think Kevin said discipleship, which I like, but it's not, that's maybe the opposite of discipleship. So these are folks who are, and there's a lot of different communities around the country, but the folks that I talk to, they're trying to live in these communal situations where they're sharing wealth, trying to steward their watershed, rehabilitate their ecosystems. There's also a big component about atoning for their ancestral sins. So, you know, acknowledging colonization, which worked hand in hand with the church, and forming relationships with each other, and also trying to heal from their addictive relationship to, say, like the internet or drugs and alcohol, or just buying stuff. Yeah, so that's one thread of the book. I think maybe my favorite thread, one of my favorite threads, is Ron Good and this woman, Joanna Kleins, who works for the U.S. Forest Service. Ron Good is a North Fork Mono elder who has been rehabilitating these meadows in the Sierra Nevada. And I got to visit one of these meadows that he had helped rehabilitate just using cultural burns, so these low intensity burns. They hauled out the trash, they burned out all the, you know, like desiccated saplings and you know, leaf litter and whatever was clogging up the meadow. And within 15 years, there was all this species return, all these insects, all these cultural plants, wild edible foods, tons of mammals came back, and they didn't bring anything in. That's the kind of amazing thing. Like he just put fire on the land, as his people had done for, you know, millennia, and so much life came back to the meadow. So that was one of the themes of the book, to return to the earlier question, is this idea that on the one hand, you have to kind of cut yourself some slack because you're just one person living in this massive, you know, whatever you call it, the panoply of, you know, people doing what they'll do. But on the other hand, in a single lifetime, you can actually affect a lot of change. He's rehabilitated several meadows in the Sierra Nevada in 15 or 20 years. It's not even a whole lifetime. So that's the final message, I think, that there's a lot we can do. Those are maybe my greatest hits. Am I forgetting anyone?
I'm sure you're forgetting someone. You've got to be, because there's so many essays in here. So I mean, I guess, like, you know, so this is a book about how we are to live, or how shall we live, right? And sort of in this sort of like ambient and terrible knowledge, and also not only in the knowledge, but in the, you know, in the physical reality of the transformations that will occur for our children, and that are already occurring for many of us. You know, not all of us to the same degree yet, but so I guess, like, I come back to this question of like, because I'm just constantly stymied by this in my own just life as a human going along, you know, like how much of this is personal and how much is political,
Yeah.
and like about how we are to live, or how we can or should live in all this. So I don't know. I mean, there's some overlap with stuff you've already discussed, but I also just finally think it's a question worth sort of asking, you know, like what so if you don't say, you're not a person whose life is already devoted to a crusade, you know, of this, well, that's unfortunate, again, perhaps the word choice, but to a mission, you know, a mission of sort of a salvation mission, or you're not rewilding, you just like have a job as a barista or whatever, you know. Like what can we do?
A lot of rewilders are baristas, actually.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So part-time, but maybe we're even something else, like something, you know, maybe we're even like working on Wall Street or something, but we actually do give a shit or whatever, you know, like how, you know, and I mean, this is like, it's a very difficult question, right? But like, how can we direct our lives toward this can we direct our lives toward this without becoming, you know, obsessed with it, or like, you know, held in dread of it, or I don't know. I mean, so what's a way that we can be, even if we're not sort of these passionate outliers, of whom you write? Like, I don't know. I just a question from the cheap seats. All of us sort of who are just, you know, who are not rewilding in the moments of our lives. You know, what else can we do? I guess, you know, what else can we do if we're not consumed?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's an interest. I kind of want to turn the question to you, because you're a person who lives with the scary data and advocates on behalf of, you know, the greater than human world as a matter of course, and obviously also in your op-eds and, you know, but I will just say, of course I can't answer that question because, you know, but what I can say is, I think one of the big surprises for me in writing the book was how moved I was by the ways in which these watershed disciple folks, were reading the Bible and using those metaphors. And one of the reasons I found it so interesting is because it's like, it speaks from within the empire. Like that's where the metaphors are coming from. So in a way, it's kind of answering a lot of these questions, which, you know, I'm not Christian, and prior to this, I was mostly interested in animism, and, you know, but if you're already living in a culture that feeds the earth and is living in a way that is reciprocal, then you don't really need that kind of story about how do you break away. So that's an interesting, that's in there. But also the recovery stuff, I think is interesting. Like the idea that you take it one step at a time, one day at a time, and you start where you start. And I also think following your interests is important. So, if, you know, you're probably most powerful, you know, taking down these fuckers who are blowing up Oak Flat in the Times, like you can do that. And most of us can't. So,
I didn't. I mean, thank you. I didn't do almost anything about that. I just wrote a little thing, but I don't want to take like credit because I'm just a writer and editor minion, basically, where I work. But I guess, you know, I guess what and I'm going to go to, because I think there's some questions soon. But I guess just like for myself, I've been thinking lately as I write about this stuff, also in kind of a non-fictional way. I've been thinking about just the language we use and the words we use for things and the assumptions we have about stuff. Like that might be actually a place to start. Like words like happy and like assumptions like what we're here for is to seek happiness, which even like people like the Dalai Lama try to tell us. But it's really this like powerful red herring, right? Like happiness, like what the fuck is that? First of all, like, like we know what pleasure is, we know what joy is, there are all these
Yeah.
different things that feed into happiness. But I think so many of us have this idea that we're supposed to be spending our lives like attaining this plateau of contentment and stuff, when it's completely impossible. We can't do that because our brains aren't constructed that way. They're we get surges of dopamine and other like neurotransmitters based on things like novelty, right? We can't just sustain this chimera, this like complete mirage called happiness, and yet we're sort of kept in our assigned seats by ideas like that, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying anything entirely new here, but I mean, maybe just to look at what it means to be alive, like as a culture, and what these words mean, and like love and happiness, and how we toss them off so incredibly easily, and actually just cleave to them when really isn't stuff about like just the experience of living, like being in a place and like seeing where you are. And
so I think that's an important, I mean, even other words besides happiness are comfort. Like what is comfort? Because I think often we're sold this lifestyle as a form of comfort, and whatever the sphere of discomfort is, like we haven't touched discomfort, so we don't really know. So it's like what else? Safety and security, and these ideas that it's like, we're told don't leave the room because beyond the walls there are dangers, there be dragons or whatever.
There be dragons.
But then you go out there and you're like, oh, actually, I just feel alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And being willing to, I mean, even it's just radical. Like this isn't going to save the world, so I'm not prescribing it as such. But I would say you can do it right now. Everybody who's watching this, if you just stop and tear your eyes away from the screen and feel into your body, if we can just stop for 1 second and really feel what it is to be in a body, in a place, in different weathers, backyard, you can be in a city, you can be in the woods, wherever. That in and of itself is sort of like a reorganization of the primary, whatever, the hierarchy of needs.
Right, seeing that we're telling ourselves the story, and that I mean, this is old stuff, but really just like telling ourselves that we're not the same as the story we tell of ourselves, which I think is like from the landmark education, like but anyway, and probably Heidegger. Anyway, but I do have a couple of questions here from people. So one is just, it's a pandemic question, which is a good one, from Sarah. She says, how, if at all, does the ongoing pandemic play into the unfolding catastrophes, that you describe in the book, and that we all, are becoming all too familiar with? So pandemic, climate nexus, extinction nexus.
I don't I mean, it's my understanding that these are going to come fast and furious because of the deforestation. And, I don't think I know anything that anyone else who has looked at the New York Times or whatever doesn't know. Mm-hmm. The only thing I can say about that might be sort of unique is that for me, it has been, I mean, I've survived just fine, but it's disturbing because I sort of, I feel like we really shine in crisis typically, like anytime if you've ever lived in a major metropolitan area when the lights go out, or, after a storm or whatever, which is not to cheapen or put a rosy spin on the real costs and the fact that people lose their lives and stuff. But it does give people a wake up call. They wake up, they're like, oh, right, I'm mortal. My needs actually can be described in few words: water, shelter, companionship, heat. And we can provide that for each other. And so people rise to the occasion often. And in this case, it's just really sucked because we can't pull together physically, which is not to say that there haven't been feats of heroism in the midst, but that's just been a continual thread of sadness for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And also there's a question from Carrie uh, who says, as a pretty typical American consumer, what are the most effective actions I can take toward conservation or rehabilitation? So maybe that's a little bit like what I was asking you about, like if we work on Wall Street or whatever, what can we do? And not that that's a typical American consumer, but you know, yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, probably other people can answer this question better than I can, but my impulse is to say, you know, figure out where you live and where, you know, where your water comes from, and you know, where are you sourcing your food, and not because like eat local is going to save the world, but I think it's the first step is overcoming estrangement. The first step is overcoming abstraction. You know, once you start to have knowledge of these different entities, specific knowledge, not just water, you know, but like how the watershed works, where it comes from, then you start to form a relationship with it. And then you can ask questions like, okay, how can I better serve this source? You know, like what are my particular gifts that I can apply in service to all the generations of life that still want to live and still want to come here, you know, like fuck us, but you know, can we build towards something that we won't benefit from? That's the dream that I hold, and keeps me at least returning to the question, not like, you know, fighting even the good fight. I wouldn't glorify myself in those terms. To me, it's overcoming the abstraction, to summarize.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome answer, and we don't actually hear it all the time. Here's a question from Michael, which is, I just like this question. What would 16-year-old Lisa say about this book?
Well, I'd love to know. I'm sure she thinks I pull my punches too much, but in a way, that's who I was writing to. So, you know, I definitely wanted to woo her to some extent, and also to honor that. You know, I feel like either these children activists are deified, and there's way too much pressure put on them, and way too much, you know, like, be our guiding light. It's like, why don't you fucking step up and be the adult? Like, why do these kids have to do it? Or, you know, they're just idealistic, and that's sort of the old saw. And I just wanted to honor that experience of being a kid and feeling like it was hard to find elders to look to, harder than I think now, maybe. But, and the experience of really becoming disillusioned, and what a tragedy that is. And I think it's like equivalent to someone losing their religion or something. Yeah.
Okay, here is one from Nicole. She says, I feel a lot of philosophies from the 90s and aughts, anarcho-primitivism, ecofeminism, left my cyclical and fundamental until I got older. Oh, I don't know. Now I feel more accepting and almost hopeful, and it seems like there's a change in overall thinking about new possibilities. Did your attitude experience a sea change over the years while you were writing this book?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think if I understand the question, I think the amazing thing is, I talk about it. I think this wound up in the book. There, you know, people would be like, yeah, but if the ice caps melt, we'll farm on Antarctica. That was literally the kind of shit that people said to me. So it's not like no one cared about the environment then, but wow, it's crazy now, like how in the ether it is. I mean, the fact that this language is even commonplace is huge. I think it was much more a kind of caricature, tree hugging, or you're like blowing up logging equipment, which it's not like I'm recommending, but also it was like such a to-do about nothing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And then from Candace, I'm curious about the way you think of the relationship or estrangement between radical communities and the mainstream system-oriented approaches of looking at responding to these crises. I'm getting at the bridging of these communities, the blending more so than a commentary on the inherent divide. And she says,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Really excited for the book.
Oh, thank you. I mean, one thing I would say, which I love, Peter actually says this in the book, we need like 1,000 solutions to the problem. Like we don't need to all hold hands and sing the same song. You know, if anything, we just need these little communities to do their work and, you know, not shit on each other, obviously. But so that's something that gives me hope, actually, that idea that we could work toward, you know, adjacent cooperations, but we don't all have to believe the same thing. But I guess the other thing I would say is if people do want to build bridges, I think it's worthy work, and that, you know, your purity of vision, or like, you know, the fire that keeps you getting up in the morning or whatever is not going to be adulterated or, you know, you don't need to be pure to make a difference. Like, just think about the children that are still coming, you know, just think about the baby animals that are still coming, and think about, like, would they mind if you spoke to this person who said something messed up that you don't agree with, you know? Like, no, they care about whether or not they have a planet to live on. That's not a very sophisticated answer to that question, but I think it's great.
I think it's great. I think that's a great answer. I mean, it's this whole, you know, stuff about, I think you quoted the Freud thing about the narcissism of minor differences or something in the book. Yeah. And I think that, you know, the left in general, like progressive culture, is plagued by this, and particularly now, you know, just sort of certain aspects that are kind of, I don't know, arguably sort of Stalinist or McCarthyist in the realm of, you know, dissent and free speech and stuff in the left, you know, are actually being really divisive right now, I think. And I don't know, you could say a bit about the narcissism of minor differences. I mean, it's just like a totally fascinating, and I think, you know,
I wish I could
lucid idea.
Yeah. Well, I share your feeling. And it gets confusing because any given instance, you're like, yeah, that's a valid complaint that somebody's raising. But in the aggregate, one feels, if we're honest, enervated by it, you know? So if you have a finite amount of energy, then you want to think about, like, what lights you up and keeps you feeling. By the way, we're all going to die pretty quickly. So you want to also enjoy your life while you're here and enjoy your body. And there's no conflict there between loving your life and feeling safe with the people that you are in relationship with. And like, they're not going to throw you in the garbage can because you fuck up. Right. Yeah, the narcissism of minor differences. I wish I could remember the Freud quote. By the way, not so fashionable to quote Freud.
No, yeah, but I like that. I like it. Yeah,
I'm a fan of his. Some of his stuff.
Yeah, right.
But he essentially says it's not the people who are diametrically opposed that have the most conflict on a daily level. It's the people who are pretty close. You know, their territories are adjoining. So the thing I think I most resent is the notion, and this is maybe where, when you're talking about Stalinism or something, is the notion that one can, you know, purify their friends and make them better. Like that language, you know, about making people better through kind of coercive shame or whatever. Like the threat of exclusion, you know, which is primary. That's something I resent it just because it seems like bullshit to me. I don't really think that's what's happening.
Right.
Yeah, but again, we're talking in generalities. I'm sure there are plenty of specific situations in which I wouldn't feel that way.
Sure. Yeah. Does anyone have any more questions? I'm not seeing any new questions, but if someone has one, feel free.
I'm just looking to see if there's anything. Nope. Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's just a pleasure. And I think you're one of the smartest, funniest writers writing. So I hope everyone who didn't come here to see Lydia will check out her books, but especially A Children's Bible, because it's
Aw.
was almost like a religious experience for me. It sounds like horseshit, but it's true. I mean, I felt like it was an extrasensory experience. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I enjoy praise. But a question, no, 2 questions did come in, so maybe, and we have like 8 minutes, so maybe we should get to them. So one from Martin, who asks, to what extent, 2 questions, to what extent is our selfishness, whether it's rooted in avarice or a distorted view of individualism, a critical factor in our descent into the apocalyptic future of climate change? That is a really articulate question. Do you need me to say it again, or are you good?
No, I'm looking at it actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So that's the first question anyway. We can.
Number one, I would say, I think selfishness and individualism are poor consolation prizes for being, isolated and estranged. That's it. I just don't like, I don't think that's I think these are like, this is like a negative, like a medicine that makes you sicker or something. I don't know. Like, so I think the most critical factor is probably, a system into which we've all been born that has made us selfish, as because we're traumatized and trying to survive, and there are no better methods. I mean, like, there's no better story to live into. So that's what I would say. And then, are we at a point that extreme solutions are necessary to avert disaster? That I honestly don't feel qualified to speak to. I think some of the solutions that are proposed frighten me. Some of them seem like promising. And I even write in the final chapter about people that are proposing pretty radical stuff in terms of rewilding degraded landscapes, like writ large. And I'm sure there are, I don't know. To me, that's promising. So worth entertaining. When is the paperback coming out? As soon as you guys stop buying the hardback. Could be tomorrow.
That's a good answer. I like it.
Okay.
All right. Well, so Lisa, thank you for speaking with everyone. I was really happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I don't know, everyone should buy this book. It's excellent. It's so good. And yeah, I'm gonna text you or something afterward, a little anecdote about it. But for now, I will say good night to everyone.
Good night, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Lydia. And I'm going to pop in the YouTube channel for our Powell's YouTube channel in the chat there. Make sure you click on that. You can check out all of our past events that we've had, all our virtual events, and tell your friends that they can watch this event. It'll probably be popping up there tomorrow. And one more time, I'll also paste in a link to Lisa's book, Believers. And so go out and buy that. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Lydia, again. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And have a great night.